And we're going to do a brief moment of Torah study. If you can turn to page 9, no, not 9, to page 10, I believe, page 10 of your handout. That would be great. The concluding day of, and we read about this, of the Tabernacles, the Mishkan's inauguration was actually the first day of the Hebrew month of Nisan, a fortuitous coincidence between our portion and Mivarchim Chodesh, and thus required an offering for the new month. While Aaron, as the high priest, would normally partake of the Rosh Chodesh offering, he refrained from eating it on this occasion because his sons remained unburied, thus giving him the status of what is called an onen, the person who is waiting the burial of one of their close relatives. In the meantime, the offering became defiled because it sat there, and Moses was upset with Aaron for not having eaten it before it was defiled. However, on further consideration, Moses ends up approving of Aaron's conduct, because the following verse that we read today says, Vayishma Moshe vayitav beinav, that when Moses heard this, he approved. What did Moses hear? So the Rashi brings in a midrash, as Rashi always does, that tries to explain what caused Moses to change his mind about Aaron's behavior. So on the phrase Vayitav Ba'inav, it says Hoda v'lo vosh lomar lo shamati. And basically it means Moses admitted that Aaron was correct, and Moses was not ashamed. That is, not ashamed of admitting that he was incorrect. He did not try to cover up his error by saying, I never heard that. Rather, Moses stated, apparently publicly, I did know of it and I forgot it. Thank you, Aaron, for the conversation, for reminding me. And you are correct. I am wrong. I am humbled. As Rashi explains, Aaron correctly refrained from partaking of the Rosh Chodesh offering because of his status as an onen. He wasn't really supposed to. And so Moses admitted publicly that he was wrong, that Aaron was correct. Not everybody's able to calmly and kindly admit when they are wrong and someone else is correct. Notably, even though Moses was the acknowledged expert, he gave Aaron the opportunity to explain. And once heard, Moses publicly shows humility. Moses is known as an anav in our tradition. That's one of his qualities. In fact, in the book of Numbers, it will state, Va'ish Moshe anav ma'od mikol ha'adam, more humble than any other person. So let's talk about humility for a second. What's the difference between a genuine modesty or humility and a false one? Any thoughts, Josh? Is that your hand up? Okay, sorry.
So I think that a genuine humility comes from a place of confidence and self-knowledge, where you're not afraid to know what you're good at, but you also know that you're human and you can make mistakes, and you know what you're not good at. Whereas a false modesty is one where you sort of clothe yourself in a camouflage to hide up your own insecurities.
Mm-hmm.
So
thank you. So, and I'm going to sort of digest it because I'm not sure that everyone at home could hear, but if I misstate it, you'll please let me know. That Josh offered wonderfully and beautifully the idea that one really needs to have sort of a healthy ego and a good sense of self and a healthful assurance of one's own being to actually exhibit a genuine humility. For those who don't have that in place, you can do one of two things. One is that you might be sort of arrogant or some variation of that, which allows you an inability to be genuine in humility and might have you sometimes say, oh, I'm sorry, but not really meaning it or feeling it. On the other hand, if you have a very negative sense of self, you may always be constantly apologizing humbly, but really not out of genuineness, out of fear that somebody might dump on you, in order to make yourself maybe not feel worse in front of the person or not make you feel worse in your mind. So having a healthy sense of self is very important, sort of a way or prerequisite maybe to giving genuine modesty often and regularly when it's required and necessary. I may have misstated that. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Anybody else want to comment on false and genuine modesty? So can a particularly accomplished person recognize that they are accomplished, their own sort of greatness, and still be modest? Is it possible to achieve great things and be modest? I see Josh with an idea, kind of.
I want to let everybody else have an opportunity.
I don't see anyone else with their hand raised, so have a go.
I would say, based on my previous answer, your wonderful submission, that you can only truly achieve greatness or truly achieve modesty if you are confident and capable of recognizing your own greatness. Not to say that everybody who achieves greatness is also modest. That's certainly not the case. But I can say from my own experience working with people, the ones who are genuinely accomplished and good at their jobs are the ones who are capable of genuine honesty and not just admitting what they're wrong, but building up their subordinates. Whereas those who strive for nothing but greatness and truly don't achieve it are often not capable of that. So I'd say that, yes.
Thank you. Yeah. So Josh was saying, and I may be phrasing it slightly differently than he does, but hopefully I do justice, that actually only people who are accomplished and healthfully and confidently and assuredly so are really the ones who really can exhibit modesty. And that while of course there are people who achieve great things who are not modest and have a healthy ego, it takes that. And I would sort of state with that accomplishment is for everyone. We can all be accomplished in many ways. We can be accomplished in kindness. We can be accomplished in decency. We can be accomplished in helpfulness. We can be accomplished in many, many ways. And we should feel good about that when we are. And when we are healthy about it, we'll be able to be modest about it. So I think that's sort of what I heard, Josh.
And your addendum was what I was thinking as you were talking. So
again,
I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Toda rabah. So I want us all just to, Bavakasha, Alma.
In order to be humble, you have to be able to listen, well as always take care of yourself. And even though I'm wrong, I still am able to understand what you were saying. Just as you said, and you talk with those people, how you approach them, you showed a certain humbleness, and you understood where they were at. That's not where you were at, but you were able to listen and then respond in a different way.
Yeah.
Listening is very important.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Alma. Alma's point was saying that in all of this, it's important to be a very good listener. And being a good listener, we sometimes have to also say to ourselves, I was wrong. And there's no need for me to be defensive about it or angry about it to the other person. I can be humble enough to say that not only to myself, I can admit it if it's appropriate to the other person. I think that listening and responding appropriately is also true when we're right. Sometimes when we're right, we don't have to beat the other person over the head with our rightness. Sometimes we can say, this person is hearing me, has already heard my point. There's nothing further to be gained by repeating myself indefinitely about my rightness. And if they disagree but aren't inclined to take in what I'm saying, there's no point in screaming about it either, right? So sometimes your wisdom about taking a moment to be listening, both to the other person and to our heart, and to feel good about where we are within ourselves and perhaps within the discussion itself, should lead us. What Alma, I didn't hear.
Stay with us for 4 months or so. Then after a certain point in time, to tell her that it was time to leave, even though she had no other place to go except back to her house. I tried to explain to her, she became very defensive. Instead of listening to me and hearing my viewpoint,
Yeah.
it was time to, are you asking me to move? I was just absolutely crushed. Because she became very defensive instead of listening to what you said. Thank you, and I appreciate you having me before.
Beautiful, thank you. Alma suggested, told us that there was a time where she had housed a relative for 4 months, but after that 4 months, it became necessary for her to ask the person to tell them that they can't continue that and they needed her to find another place, but the person could not hear that. And of course, part of humility is not only thinking about what I need, but what's best for the situation, what's best for everyone. That the person could not hear Alma and how having that extra, being housed by Alma and her family was no longer possible, was putting a strain and a burden on them, and that for the betterment of everyone, that this woman who did have another place to go, maybe find another place. And sometimes we actually don't manage to hear the other person's point of view and how what's going on affects them. And that's really, really important to do. So I really, really appreciate you sharing that, Alma. Thank you so much. We're going to move on, but it'd be nice for all of us to think about, we're not going to raise our hand and share, but think about a time when we came to recognize and acknowledge that we were wrong about something, and that another person was actually correct. We maybe didn't realize that at first, but we came to realize it, and that we admitted our mistake. And how does admitting our mistake affect the relationship, or in that particular relationship? So number one, and to what degree can we also think about describing an act of humility of ours or somebody else's that we found inspiring in some way? So we might want to think about that for a moment or two on this Shabbos, now or at our lunch tables or later. Is there anything about Passover that might inspire us to think about humility and a proper humility? Something within the Passover story? It may be worthwhile, because as I've heard our discussion today, it feels like humility is something that we don't always work on and think about, whether it's our personal humility or our humility as a congregation or our humility as a people. But as I've heard from Josh and Alma and all of us thinking together and doing Torah together, It feels like maybe that's a good way to think about preparing spiritually and emotionally for our Passover Seders and the holiday. So I'm going to leave us with that. And thank you so much for the Torah discussion. We are out of time. I was going to be speaking today about my trip to the South. I will do that at another time, I promise. Perhaps during Passover, we'll have the opportunity. It's very shayach. It's very appropriate to the Passover story. My trip, my racial justice pilgrimage that I took, I was honored as one of 20 leaders of the conservative movement to be on a special pilgrimage. And I want to tell you and share that with you. But I will do that on another Shabbat because it is getting late. We have a little bit more davening to do. So I'm going to ask us to do it. And so if we can turn to page 180.